She got a message for the people, a brilliant mind and a clean soul. She's standing up to the evil and making sure that we all grow strong enough to break these chains we get.
Yes. Welcome back. You are listening to Lurie Daniel Favors on Sirius XM's Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. That song, once again, shout out to all of you who made note of your appreciation thereof. Now, to be clear, that is a song that was written and sung by my husband, Brian Favors. Shout out to you. It was produced by my child, Nasia Favors. Shout out to you. And the track was produced by Jeff Kale. So shout out to him. So it's a great thing to have musical accompaniment, and I'm very grateful for it. But boy, do we have a lot to get to this morning. And today's episode is basically a study of hubris and stupidity. Now, as a reminder, and again, we'll go far more into detail about this in today's podcast episode, which will be out later on today at around 2-ish or so p.m. And the podcast is, again, called Lurie Breaks It Down. I encourage all of you to take a listen to the podcast if you want the even more in-depth version of this. And, of course, don't forget to share the podcast with your friends. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as well for those of you who are watching on YouTube. Now, Urban View and I have been in conversation here about a whole host of things already. I know y'all don't all get a chance to participate in that, but it's important for you to know that by the time we get here, we have already set the table. And one of the things that we talked about yesterday that I want to refer us back to was that this war in Venezuela, and I guess we can call it a war, maybe we can call it a police operation, law enforcement, it sort of depends on who you ask, but even that distinction has a real significant impact. And as you may recall, we talked yesterday about the concept of the squirrel, and squirrels I use as a phrase to, and it's not just me, I don't think, this is not something I created, I don't know where I got this from, but it's a concept that a number of people use. Squirrels are basically a way of referring to news that, yeah, you should know about, but it's taking your attention off of all the other very important things. So as I mentioned yesterday, when you have a squirrel situation, you got all this stuff that you should be focusing on over here, but then there's a squirrel moving around over there, and the squirrel's moving so fast that you can't focus on the stuff that's over here because you're so busy paying attention to the squirrel. And for a lot of us, it feels more and more like what's happening in Venezuela is a squirrel. But just in case you did not catch yesterday's episode, I just want to remind you of just some of the other things that have been taking place that Americans should be paying attention to, but probably are not, because we got a whole ass other country's president kidnapped and locked up in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center, thanks to y'all's president. But just as a reminder, here's a quick recap-a-roo of just some of the stories that the Venezuela story has eclipsed. We learned yesterday that more than 100 companies have filed warn notices indicating they're going to have massive layoffs. We talked about the fact that the federal chair of the reserves, the board chair of the Federal Reserves. Let's get it right, Favors. Jerome Powell, which is a white man who has the blackest name ever. He says that the U.S. is drastically overstating jobs numbers to the tune of, by stating that we're gaining $60,000 jobs a month, it's much more likely that we're losing 20,000 jobs a month. And he says this is a concern that has been a part of their decision to cut their interest rates. We've got Democracy Now! Reminding us that, and a number of other outlets, that the Trump administration has frozen child care to all 50 states. Y'all's health care subsidies expired. Your student loans are now able to be garnished. We had Jack Smith come out. Jack Smith, who on today, January the 6th, the timing is so curious. Jack Smith, who you may recall, was the special prosecutor, and we were talking about this earlier with Urban View, the special prosecutor who picked by Merrick Garland to investigate what happened on January the 6th of 2021. And what he found, and what we now know, because the deposition, the records are out, the transcripts are out, you can watch it on video. If you don't want to read, you can watch it on video, although remember, we're doing our read 3, write 1, read 3 pages a day, write 1 paragraph. We make another thing, read 3, write 1. But if you ain't read nothing today, you can read them transcripts, and you could think clearly about what was happening at that time. And what we know from Jack Smith and everything that we now know from what he was telling the congressional Republicans was basically Donald Trump was in on it. He knew about it. He helped promote it. He benefited from it. He wanted it to succeed. That is January 6th in a nutshell. It was an attempted coup d'etat that actually was far more successful than I think a lot of us realize. And it's important for us to know that, because similar to this is something I was saying with Urban View earlier, similar to how after the Civil War, you had a massive effort to basically rewrite history. That's what's been happening with January the 6th. And after the Civil War, they were very successful. They had women's groups, women's groups like the Daughters of the Confederacy. You can think of them as the grandmothers of the modern day Moms for Liberty. And they basically went around erecting statues of Confederate soldiers in the decades after the Civil War. They rewrote curriculum, and they basically made this whole argument that the war of Civil War was not about slavery. It was about states' rights. And the North was just trying to overwhelm the South with their desires for what should be happening in the states. And because we value the states, that war was a war of Northern aggression. You should always ask somebody when they say the Civil War was about states' rights, you should ask them, states' rights to do what? What did the states want to do? What was it that they were trying to do? Because it's one thing if you're saying states' rights to, blow up a building. Does the state have a right to do that? Well, there's a legal framework that we can assess to determine that. Does the state have the right to ban all cars from being inside its borders? That's a question we should ask. And if that's all that they were talking about in the Civil War, then that'd be one thing. But what we know is that the states' rights that they were fighting for was the states' rights to own people and to keep them enslaved, but to still profit from those people, not only monetarily, but to also make sure that you could count their bodies for representation purposes and to receive money from the federal government, because federal government money that is distributed via census and federal representation in Congress, which is also distributed via the numbers procured via census, that all is based on people. And so the South wanted the right to own people. That's what the states' right that they were looking for was all about. So you should just ask them those follow-up questions. But we know that January 6th, today, the anniversary, Jack Smith was like, no, we could have not only proved that he did it, we could have convicted him, and he should be serving jail time right now. I mean, that's not a direct quote, but that's basically what he was saying. And then we learned all about the fact that on Christmas Eve, we learned that there was a report, an allegation that Donald Trump had forcibly assaulted a woman, impregnated her, a girl. Wasn't a woman. She was, 13, 14 years old, according to the reports. And then when she got pregnant and had the baby, he and the uncle, allegedly, according to the allegations, killed the baby and then threw the baby in Lake Michigan. All that came out on Christmas Eve, right? We learned that there were other women in the Epstein files that came out who basically said, yeah, no, Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein both raped me. So all of that came out. So all of that is happening, in addition to all the other news that we should be covering. But Venezuela is really sucking the air out of most of those stories. So I have an obligation to remind you that those things are also still happening, even as we talk about what's taking place today. So let's talk about Venezuela and let's talk about this oil, because first things first, when the Americans, the white colonizers, when they say that the Venezuelans owe American companies for the oil, I want you to remember what happened after Haiti kicked France's ass. Now, Haiti been suffering for kicking France's ass ever since, but Haiti basically kicked France's ass. The Africans who were enslaved in Haiti, who then would become Haitians, but the Africans who were enslaved in Haiti whooped France's ass, and then France was like, all right, fine, you can have your freedom, but we are going to have reparations. And basically France kind of surrounded the island and was like, y'all can be free Africans if you want to be, but what you're not going to be able to do is trade with anybody. You're not going to be able to get any of your needs met. You're not going to be able to have diplomatic international relationships with any other countries until you pay us the money. We want the money for the reparations. And basically that's what happened. For over a century, Haiti had to pay France reparations for the crime of being free. That's basically what's happening when you hear Americans saying that Venezuelans owe them something. You owe me something. They don't owe you shit. And we're going to talk about why. Now, I want you to take a listen to this clip. This is a Venezuelan historian, Miguel Salas. And Miguel Salas is basically like, I don't know who the fuck Trump think he is, but he is dead ass wrong when he going around talking about how the Americans are owed something, but the Venezuelans, we don't owe you nothing. But I'm going to play my screen, share my screen so you guys can see it. And I want you to pay attention to what this historian has to say and listen intently to the details. Let's take a listen.
Venezuela knew the existence of oil before the Europeans or the Americans arrived. The very first oil industry was 1870s in Alquitrán in the state of Táchira, where Venezuelans ran their own oil operation. They exploited it, they developed it. Having no infrastructure, they really couldn't promote it. And the lack of internal combustion engines meant that they couldn't really develop it. The oil was discovered profusely in 1922 in Cabimas, in La Rosa. It was run by, at that time, British and Dutch companies. Venezuela eventually nationalized its oil industry in 1975, taking effect in 1976. It was controlled by Venezuelans. It was run by Venezuelans, and it was fully compensated. The American companies and the Dutch companies and the American companies and the British were fully compensated, much above and beyond what they had already extracted out of the ground in huge amounts of profits. For Exxon Mobil, for example, Standard Oil Company of New Jersey, Creole Petroleum was its most profitable subsidiary. It maintained that entire operation of Standard Oil, which is today Exxon Mobil. What Chavez did in 2006 and 7 was to close the back door that was left open in Article 5 of the reform for nationalization in 1976, which had allowed other existing oil companies to proceed in Venezuela as partners and operating with PDVSA. He imposed on those companies the joint ventures, but they had to include PDVSA, which is the Venezuelan Petroleum Corporation. So Trump is utterly wrong, utterly lying when he says that the oil companies were stolen from the Americans. They were fully compensated. They had received compensation over and over and over, in addition to what they had extracted in profits out of Venezuela previously. But we go back to the old Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso, the minister of the petroleum in Venezuela in the 1960s, that said oil is the excrement of the devil. And once again, Trump has proven that.
I think Trump is the excrement of the devil too, but ain't nobody asked me, so I guess that don't really count for nothing except my opinion. But it's a true opinion. It's a true opinion. I can't prove it as a fact, but it is a true opinion. So there's the fact that, one, Venezuela don't owe you shit, Exxon, Chevron, but they don't owe you nothing. But then also, that oil is not just sitting around waiting for the great white colonizers to come and get it like y'all's president is pretending he can do. There's this gentleman who on the Twitters is known as Mr. Global 2025. He is a Forbes energy contributor and identifies as an oil and gas expert. I want you all to take a listen to Mr. Global 2025, because one of the things he points out is like the oil ain't just sitting there. Now, we're not going to play this full clip. Y'all get a chance to hear this fully in the podcast episode. But Mr. Global is like, y'all acting like we just going to go over there and put a stick in the ground and turn it on. Y'all know how y'all's president was acting like he had freed the water in California to put out the fires, but he ended up draining the reservoir and just flooding water into the damn desert. Didn't help nobody for nothing. That's kind of like how they act like they're going to be able to just go into Venezuela and take the oil. And that's just not the case. Take a listen to this clip. We're not going to play the full thing, but let's hear it.
This idea that American oil companies are going to rush to Venezuela to produce all this oil, that's not a thing. Having the largest oil reserves in the world doesn't mean what Donald Trump thinks it means. The only thing that matters is the value of that oil and how much you can profit on it. People are so focused on the amount of oil there. Who cares if you can't make a fortune on it? And you can't. It's not the best investment out there by any means. It's not even close. $100 billion of investment needed over a decade to restore the infrastructure to where it once was. So this idea of asking American oil companies who are currently having a hard time due to what? Donald Trump's policies with OPEC, laying off people, cutting their budgets, cutting CapEx, laying down rigs. These companies are going to go invest $100 billion in Venezuela, in an unstable country? It's ludicrous. And people will say, well, Chevron is there. Not really. The reason Chevron is there is because they took a 20% stake in PDVSA, which is Venezuela's state-owned national oil company. They lost $4 billion. They're there helping Venezuela, and Venezuela is just giving them some oil. Like, they're not even getting paid. They're there because they're stuck there. The removal of sanctions in Venezuela is not enough to restore oil production in Venezuela.
We're just going to pause it there. And again, you can hear the rest of the full clip for those of you who are going to listen to this episode on the podcast. But for now, I just need us to be clear. The oil ain't just like, oh, here come the whites. It's going to liberate our black liquid self into the hands of the white man. That's not going to happen. And then we also find out that according to Reuters, remember how yesterday we played a clip, we either played a clip or we quoted Donald Trump as saying that he had been in conversation with the oil companies before and after the invasion into Venezuela and the kidnapping of the president. And I know that like at the BBC, they saying we can't use the word invade. It's not an invasion. It's a whole ass invasion and kidnapping. It was a kidnapping. Y'all might want to act like the emperor got clothes on. We can all see he's bucket ass naked and orange. The emperor is bucket ass naked and orange. But what we learned from Reuters is that might have been a whole ass lie. According to Reuters, we find the following quote: the three biggest U.S. oil companies, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron, have not yet had any conversations with the administration about Maduro's ouster, according to 4 oil industry executives familiar with the matter, contradicting, this is a direct quote, contradicting contradicting Trump's statement over the weekend that he had already held meetings with all of the U.S. oil companies, both before and since Maduro was seized. Nobody in those 3 companies has had conversations with the White House about operating in Venezuela. And so You can't get the oil out the ground easily. It's of the thickest, most sticky kind of oil, which means the amount of capital expenditure and investment you would have to sink in order to pull it out is going to be exorbitant. But then y'all's president is talking about, son, we're going to have our best and most successful oil companies there, and then we'll reimburse them. Who's the we and who is reimbursing? Because the we and the reimbursing usually means the American tax dollars. And achieving the goal of pulling that oil out is going to take years of work and billions of dollars of investment. Howsoever, according to the New York Times, because y'all know, I mean, not the New York Times, the Financial Times, according to the Financial Times, y'all know I love me reading a good paper. We learned from the Financial Times, front page, we learned the following, quote, as Nicolas Maduro is right now, like panicked. Well, I don't know if he's panicked. I don't know if he was in on it. Some weird reports, some weird things happening. But what we learned from the Financial Times, Nicolas Maduro, who has now been, he's locked up, he has been incarcerated. We learned that they're excited about the opportunities to go into Venezuela, but people aren't yet banging down the doors to go into Venezuela. There's a lot of political instability. There's a lot of concern about what's going to happen once they get there. And let me turn the page and open up to the second page. I know I love a good paper. What we find here is that, quote, the U.S. assault on Caracas and Trump's warning that Washington would dictate terms to Venezuela's new leaders has raised the prospect of a corporate rush into a country boasting the world's largest oil reserves. The last major opening of a country's reserves was in 2009 in Iraq. The parallels, where auctions for oil fields drew multi-billion-dollar bids 6 years after the U.S. invasion. But the three U.S. oil majors have greeted Trump's call for investment cautiously due to concerns about political instability, a history of expropriated assets in Venezuela, and the vast sums required to boost production. There is complete and total lack of consistency with what these people are talking about when it comes to what the plan was. And so let's inspect what the plan was. So put my paper to the side. Let's inspect what the plan was, because it's giving WEI, presidenting. And as we all know, I coined the phrase WEI, which stands for white, entitled, and incompetent. And that basically is the phrase that describes what happens when you replace overly qualified people of color, usually black, who you don't like because the blackness, well, really, no, you don't like, they fine with the blackness. You don't like it because of the whiteness and the way your whiteness has socialized you to see blackness. But it's giving WEI presidenting. It's giving WEI economic policy. This is WEI international affairs. This is a WEI cover-up from the freaking Epstein files and all that other shit that I pointed out earlier this morning. You are not off. This has not gotten off to a great colonizing whiteness start. Your colonizing whiteness ancestors, I think, would be a little embarrassed. They'd be a little embarrassed. And then we find out that they so confused about what's going to happen next, they don't even know who's going to be in charge. It's like the Spider-Man meme where everybody pointing at each other. You going to do it. No, you going to do it. No, I'm going to do it. No, you going to do it. We have learned that Stephen the Ghoulish One Miller is allegedly, reportedly, supposedly going to be a part of this effort, going to play an elevated role, they say, in Venezuela. And Maria Corina Machado, she ain't gonna be president. Why she ain't gonna be president? Even though she won 2/3 of the vote in the last election, which Nicolas Maduro ignored because he is, again, a dictator similar to Donald Trump. She ain't gonna be president because she took that Nobel Peace Prize, and Donald Trump was like, she should have gave it to me. She shouldn't have accepted it. It was really mine. So that's why she ain't going to be president. We're going to talk more about this in just a minute. But when you think about Stephen Miller, the ghoulish one, I want you to be reminded as to who that ghoulish one actually is. You may recall he is in charge of Trump's immigration policy. He wrote the policy that separated children, put them in cages. He is the current slave trades architect. I think that's a good way to phrase it. The current slave trades architect, because we are in the middle of a slave trade, like it or not. I'm going to share my screen so I want you to see this man, because he ghoulish, and his visuals really reflect the evil of his heart. I want you all to now take a listen to this clip.
We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower. It is absurd that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us, to hoard weapons from our adversaries, to be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States rather than on behalf of the United States.
Sovereign countries shouldn't be able to do what they want to do.
The Monroe Doctrine and the Trump Doctrine is all about securing the national interests of America. The future of the free world, Jake, depends on America being able to assert ourselves and our interests without apology. This whole period that happened after World War II, where the West began apologizing and groveling and begging
I don't even
and
know,
engaging these
honestly,
mass
what you're talking
reparation
about right
schemes,
now.
what I'm talking about, Jake, is the idea. And by the way, you do. I know You love doing that smarmy thing, Jake, and I was hoping to be better than that this time.
I asked you about if there should be an election.
Exactly.
I asked you if there would be an election in Venezuela. That's what I asked.
Jesus.
I said, why was the president so quick to dismiss Machado? You answered that question. And then I said,
the objective, Jake, is to...
Yeah, it went on like that. And you can see Jake Tapper, who I find to be completely contemptible and is contemptible? Yes, contemptible and detestable as a human being as the result of the role he played in undermining the 2024 election. He was there stumped. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about right now. I asked you if there was going to be elections, and you ain't know. But so let's look at the report. Let's look at what the Washington Post and other reports have said about what is going to happen. They think, because don't nobody know, because this is, again, not a great exploration of colonizing whiteness. It's making me think that perhaps we believed that the stories of American greatness from the past were a little too readily. And for those of you who are confused about the Monroe Doctrine, I just want to be clear about this. The Monroe Doctrine is basically white people on this side of the world telling white people on the other side of the world, we got this, y'all got that, right? So the Monroe Doctrine basically was like white Americans telling white Europeans, stay your ass out of the Americas, the North and South America. We got this, we run this, and we gonna run it the way we want to. And it's sort of also a part of the white man's burden idea. For those of you who are familiar with that, I know there was a movie, The White Man's Burden, but the White Man's Burden is actually based on a poem, I believe by Rudyard Kipling. I believe that was it his? Or was he the one? It's a poem called White Man's Burden. It's a philosophy called The White Man's Burden. And the idea of the White Man's Burden is that because we are white, it is our duty and obligation to lead, dominate, colonize, and elevate the primitive brown savages of the planet. Now, the more brown you are, the more savage you are, but it is our obligation, because we're white, to be in charge of you. And you might not like it, but you're not white, so you don't get to make those decisions. Okay, that's basically like the white man's burden, and those ideas, those philosophies, that's all a part of whiteness culture, which is why I ain't got an issue with individual white people, but y'all's culture is some bullshit. Whiteness culture is evil, diabolical, and it's not actually tied to any actual heritage. It's just y'all deciding that you can be in charge of shit because you want to be. That's selfish. That's lower level energy, diabolical, very devilish and demonic of you. You need deliverance. Pray to Jesus, not the white one. But let's go to this article, because I think it's important that we explore what exactly is the plan, because it's going to involve us. Now, here's the Washington Post. As the smoke clears in Caracas, a day after President Donald Trump said triumphantly that the United States would now run Venezuela, the reality of how Washington will administer that country in the weeks and months ahead appears uncertain and stubbornly complex. Now, that's fancy whiteness culture, white people Washington Post speak for basically saying they don't know the fuck they doing. That they put all that shit in that paragraph. It was like 11 words in that paragraph. They could have just said, they don't know the fuck they doing. But let's get back to the article. Maduro's allies in Caracas are still in power, some defiantly haranguing against U.S. imperialism. Now, I'm going to pause here because, as I said in the podcast, that's a bullshit-ass, bitch-ass line, Washington Post. The idea that, quote, Maduro's allies in Caracas are still in power, some defiantly haranguing about U.S. imperialism, and then you put imperialism in quotes, use a whole-ass bitch for that, and here's why. Here's where media literacy comes into play. You invaded their country, you kidnapped their president, and brought them here. That is imperialism. You want to take their resources and claim it for yourself. That is it's not imperialism in air quotes. It's imperialism. Washington Post used a bitch for that one. But let's get back to your bitch ass article. The democratically elected opposition leaders are effectively exiled, bluntly sidelined by the Trump administration. And Washington continues to hint at more military action, not only against Venezuela, but other perceived enemies in the region, such as Cuba and Colombia. Translation, they ain't had no real plan. And now they crashing out all over the place because they trying to distract you from Venezuela with the squirrels of invading other islands. Do you see how this works? This is how this works. Cuba's state news agency reported late Sunday that 32 Cuban security personnel were killed. This is in addition to the number that more than 40 Venezuelans who were killed, innocent Venezuelans who were killed. They were killed as a result of being in direct combat with U.S. forces who seized Maduro. Here's the translation there. This is a way bigger, unforced, ego-driven, white, colonizing international fuck-up than initially reported. How many nationals of how many different countries were involved here? What the fuck was happening? Who was in charge? Well, we don't know. Maybe Marco Rubio. It's not clear, says the report, how the U.S. will manage the complex diplomacy in Venezuela on a practical level. Trump said Saturday that a working group Here come the white colonizers with the working group. A working group of top advisors was deeply engaged in planning for Venezuela's future, but even those roles and responsibilities appear unclear. Translation, they ain't got the range to handle the shit they shot. They wrote checks they asses cannot cash. Now, going on to Marco Rubio. Rubio is personally focused on the campaign, but his expansive portfolio as both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor means he's unlikely to have the time to steer the day-to-day multiple. What this basically means is Lil Marco is over his head. He's in over his head. The entire effort is in over its head. These people are not sending their best. They did not send their best. They sent Lil Marco Rubio, who has had a white nationalist approach to Latin American affairs maybe his entire life. They talk about the fact that they dismantled the entire U.S. foreign policy infrastructure since Donald Trump came into power. And now he only trusts a couple of close people. He ain't got the team anymore. He doesn't have the systems anymore. And keep in mind, other countries are no longer sharing foreign or secret information with the Americans because the Americans are led by pedophiles who don't follow international norms. We also know that the National Security Council staff was completely gutted. They don't have an assistant secretary who's supposed to be handling the affairs of the Western Hemisphere, which basically means the colonizers are flying blind. They're flying blind. Now, I want to talk briefly about Maria Corina Machado, who won the election last year. She won the election with 2/3 of the vote. And this is the election that Nicolas Maduro contested, and that's why he stayed in power. According to Donald Trump, he says it's going to be tough for her to be the leader because she doesn't have the support or the respect within the country. How the fuck you figure that? She won 2/3 of the vote according to the international rules that you said you listened to. Now, here's the translation for that one. Donald Trump, y'all's president, he big mad. He big mad that a babe with boobies got the Peace Prize and he can't stand her, so fuck her. He's been heard, allegedly, reportedly, supposedly, wandering around the White House humming to himself songs from movies like The Sound of Music. How do you solve a problem like Maria? Just humming to himself because he's worried now what he gonna do with this woman who technically won the election. Kind of like a Hillary Clinton. Some might say technically or kind of allegedly, reportedly, supposedly like a Kamala Harris. But moving on, associates of Machado, who covertly escaped Venezuela last month with the help of the United States to attend the Nobel Prize, were caught off guard by Donald Trump's comments, according to people close to her team. On Sunday, her supporters were trying to encourage the Venezuelans to come out to support, but they're not even in the country, Maria Corina Machado. She's not even in the country. And basically, people close to the White House said that, quote, the president's lack of interest in boosting Machado, despite her recent efforts to flatter Trump, stemmed from her decision to accept the Nobel Prize. So because she took the Nobel Peace Prize, and she ain't no angel, like it's a whole other story that we could do about. She ain't no angel. But basically, they said that if she had turned it down and said, quote, I can't accept it because it's Donald Trump's, she'd be the president of Venezuela today. Translation, y'all's president is a whiny little bitch, and his policies are bitch ass. And congratulations, Maria, you played yourself. Now, if you think I'm joking about this, there's actually video footage, and I'm not going to play it right now. You can watch this on the podcast, or you can listen to this on the podcast episode, where Maria is on with Hannity, and he's basically like, did you offer to give him the Peace Prize? Did that actually happen? She's like, I'm totally willing to do it. It hasn't happened yet. I totally want to give him the Peace Prize. I mean, I got the Peace Prize, but it's really the Venezuelan people's Peace Prize, and we love Donald Trump because Donald Trump took out Maduro, so I want to give him the Peace Prize. You're bitching out, babe. You got a vagina and a uterus. You already lost, and you won something that he wanted. You're never going to get it. 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 It ain't happening. It's not going to happen. Now, the Democrats have some things to say. I want you to take a listen to my congressman, Hakeem Jeffries. Literally, he's my congressman. He's my congressman, Hakeem Jeffries. And he's talking in this first clip. Actually, we're going to only play the second clip, Amina. He's talking in this first clip, which you'll get to hear in the podcast, about the fact that the future of the Venezuelan people should be determined by the Venezuelans, not Pete Hegseth, not his own mama say he's trash, Pete Hegseth. But in this clip, I want you to pay attention to, that we're going to hear right now, he's talking about the fact that this was a law enforcement issue, a war issue. We don't really know, but what Hakeem Jeffries is basically saying is like, these people ain't got a fucking clue. So I'm going to share my screen. Y'all can see my congressman in action as he talks about the fact that we don't know what the hell's going on, and apparently they don't either. Take a listen.
It's going to be interesting if they try to maintain, and the Attorney General apparently is going to be in this briefing, that this is a law enforcement operation. Explain to me. I'm trying to figure this out.
Me too.
This is a law enforcement operation that involved an elite unit of the military, Delta Force. It involved at least 150 different military planes, aircraft, and helicopters. It involved dozens of naval ships off the coast of Venezuela. It's action that apparently involved thousands of troops in different ways throughout the region. It involved direct military strikes in Venezuela. And we're supposed to believe this was a law enforcement action? Make it make sense. It does not. It was military action without explicit approval by the United States Congress.
Which kind of means
why
it was
Congress
illegal.
needs to act this week.
Yeah, Congress does need to act this week, and Congress is doing. The Democrats right now are doing a lot. Now, keep in mind, y'all didn't give Democrats no power. The Democrats don't own the House, they don't own the Senate, they don't own the White House. So there ain't nothing they can do to force the Republicans to do anything. But they are attempting to hold hearings because they want to make sure that, again, because today is also January the 6th, that we're going to have a real, honest history about what actually happened and a real dialogue about what is going on. But as you see there, the Republicans are trying to suggest that this was not a military operation, because if it was a military operation, it is illegal because it did not get approval from Congress. They had actually passed resolutions to ban this sort of effort. It is an illegal action if you're saying it's a war effort. But if you saying it's a criminal effort, baby, you needed all that. I don't. The last time I got arrested, which has been some time ago, and it was for civil rights sort of work, but I ain't seen no Delta elite force. Now, admittedly, I ain't do no big crime. I was just protesting with a bunch of other people, but I ain't never seen militarized operations like that coming for police matters, unless you're talking about the militarized police forces that drove tanks down the streets when people were protesting during Black Lives Matter protests. But apparently that's not what they were talking about either. You should just remember that the Department of Justice, when it comes to legalities against high profile figures, they have a terrible track record. Does James Comey ring a bell? Letitia James? Lindsay Halligan? Lindsay Halligan should really ring a bell, because her poor white entitled and incompetent ass, who is completely blown most of the cases she's been connected to. Is that what we're supposed to do? And then with the indictment, they do some weird shit, and I talk about this more in the podcast episode, but they have, in the initial indictment, they accused Nicolas Maduro of being the head of a cartel called Cartel de los Solas 32 times. They mentioned that cartel 32 times in the indictment, but then the New York Times was like, that cartel doesn't actually exist. That's not a real thing. And they basically claimed for months that Venezuela's president was in charge of this group that does not actually exist. So they had to remove it from the indictment, which lets you know that when you are in a situation when you are so committed to the lie that you forgot it was a lie, and then you put in your lie in official documents, that's a real problem. And then we're in a situation where one of the charges, where Nicolas Maduro is, one of the things he is accused of is basically owning machine guns. He's the president of an independent sovereign nation with a standing army, as noted by many people beyond myself, and being accused of owning machine guns by a nation that values its guns and loves its guns more than the white babies that it forces white girls to have is a stretch. But not only that, we're talking about the fact that this is an indictment. This is criminal. And so if it's an indictment and it's criminal, federal courts have limited jurisdiction. The federal court of the Eastern District of New York does not have jurisdiction in Dubai, does not have jurisdiction in these other places. You cannot get a court order in a federal district court and go to some international place and assert authority over the sovereign leader of that nation. You're going to have to explain, and I talk about this more extensively in the podcast episode, Lurie breaks it down, but you're going to have to show the court that the way you arrested the person, the defendant, was in alignment with criminal legal procedure. You're going to have to demonstrate that you did not violate laws when you quote unquote arrested this person, and then you're going to have to tell the judge, how the fuck does the American legal system have authority over the sovereign leader of a sovereign nation when the American legal system does not have authority over the American president, who, according to the American Supreme Court, declared presidents immune? And so if the president is immune here, why isn't the president of Venezuela also immune? This is not a legal matter. It's a white, entitled, and incompetent fuck up of phenomenal international proportions. The rest of the world is now making decisions while Nicolas Maduro was being arraigned in court where he said the following. How much time I got, Amina? He says the following. All right, we got 2 minutes. We're going to make it quick. He says the following in court. I am innocent. This is Financial Times. I am innocent. I am not guilty. I am a decent man, the president of my country. I am a kidnapped president, a prisoner of war. You got other countries who's like, you better bring that man back. You better put him back in, run him back. The same way you ran him up, you better run him on back. Because what does this mean for the rest of the world? What does it mean? And how do we convince the rest of the world to not send their elite forces into this country to kidnap Orange Mango Mussolini and take his... I mean, I don't know that, frankly, there'd be a whole lot of us trying to do any of that convincing. But once you break the thing and you destroy international order, there are no more rules. Which means anybody could do this. Which means, baby, we the Americans, we have some problems. We have some problems. We are seeing reports of more and more countries that have said Americans are not welcome here. And I'm just going to put out an ask on behalf of the blacks. Not that I was elected speaker of the blacks. I'm just as a member of the black delegation. I'm going to ask that all the rest of you nations that are rightfully and justifiably and correctly banning Americans from your airspace, from your shores, from your borders. I just want you to remember that there are some of us here who were brought here unwillingly, who were enslaved here and are functionally trapped here. We can't even appeal to the United Nations, which is housed here because this man done got us in a chokehold. So when you make them declarations that can't no Americans come, just give us a safe harbor, a pass. Just give us a carve out, a little asylum process, something. Because this ship is going down, baby. And we're going to be prepared to swim. I'm taking swimming lessons. We're going to head into commercial break and leave it right there. I'll take your calls at 866-801-8255, 866-801-8255.